Welcome to another figure week, hard surface week, organic week.
Hey everyone, my name is Ahmed Aldouri. I'm a concept artist and former instructor at Art Center College of Design, Brainstorm, CCS, CGMA, and various other places. And I would like to introduce to you this digital painting course that I've created. But before we get into anything, I just want to thank you for the support you've all given me this whole time. And with the support of so many of you, I've been able to put together everything I know about painting into this digital painting course. You want to become a pro illustrator, concept artist, or even just a hobbyist, but you don't have a clear map to get there. And that's where I come in. I spent the last 6 months compiling everything I know from my 20 years of art practice, and I've turned it all into a map. Starting with foundations such as rendering shapes, color theory, painting basic subjects, understanding brushwork, brush economy, all that fun stuff, deconstructing the skull, drawing it from every angle, all the way to master studies, stylized painting, and you'll find yourself at the end of the course doing a concept art project based on everything that we learned in the first 14 lessons. So how does it work? Well, you sign up, you watch the lectures, do the assignments, post them to the community page if you want, and treat it as a self-study, except for those of you who have signed up for the weekly meeting, where I personally critique your work in a virtual classroom setting. I believe learning by repetition is super important, and that's what I've sort of presented a lot in this course, and the assignments are tailored for that, as adapted from my time teaching at Art Center. And each of these lessons have step-by-step explanations in real time. If you've ever seen my videos, you know exactly how I teach. And this course is intended to be a substitute for a college level course, but you don't have to pay the $4,000 or $5,000 per class, racking up maybe $200K in debt. With my custom design course, you'd be paying a fraction of that. And of course, I also have payment plan options if you don't want to pay for the whole thing at once. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see you soon.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Digital Artcast. Thanks again for tuning in. As I always say with most of these episodes, I hope you guys are staying productive and safe during this unprecedented time that we're going through right now. Wherever you are in the world, I hope that you're listening and you're happy and you're enjoying your day to day. And I'm just glad that you guys can be around here to listen and take part in this collective that is now Digital Artcast. Thanks out to the couple of guys that have been in Discord suggesting guests. I'm definitely taking note of those and making a small list and trying to get people organised and involved. But again, with the way the world is and with time zones, it is difficult to get everybody on the same schedule. So I am working on that. I'm reacting to your feedback, and hopefully it will happen soon with certain guests. I'm just waiting to hear back. As always with these podcasts, I do try and source some of the best people I can, and hopefully when their schedule frees up I can get them on the podcast to chat. This particular guest we've had on, or are going to have on today, is someone I've admired for a long time within the industry, on multiple aspects of their discipline and also things I've been involved in, and it's just been a great opportunity now to get them involved today and talk about their journey particularly, and the things they're doing currently in the industry, and hopefully you guys can learn and grow as always from these conversations. And again, if you have any feedback or any questions, leave it down in the description below. Today I'm very honoured to welcome along someone, like I said, I've admired for a while, and again, I hope you guys find it interesting. But today we're talking to Mr. Clinton Crumpler. Hey, Clinton, how's it going?
Good, man. How's it going?
Yeah, decent. Thanks for being involved. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I think I'm more aware of you at the moment because of my involvement in 3D and prop making and stuff like that. But for people who don't know, what is your kind of current job title, or what is it your kind of day-to-day is at the moment?
Yeah, for sure. So currently I'm the studio owner and creative director at Decagon Studios. And that's mostly like I deal with like operations, art direction, dealing with clients, working with a lot of the artists that we have. I'm kind of the intermediary between like a lot of the client communication we have. So then we bring on new clients and like what they're essentially looking for, and then helping establish their art direction. And then just kind of helping make sure the artists kind of understand that kind of path moving forward as well. And working with those leads to kind of carry out those the client requests and whatnot.
Yeah. And then again, this is, I say fairly new, within the last couple of years, but then, you've obviously had a whole education and a whole career separate from that as well, where you started, because this isn't this isn't your first point. So with you within art, what was your kind of journey in? Did you traditionally go to school for it? Did you self-teach? Like, what was your kind of journey in?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say my kind of passage was, I'd say more of a traditional one, but at the time there wasn't a lot of schools that offered any kind of 3D application. So when I started, I wanted to get into games, but I wasn't quite sure the route. So I went to school for 4 years for a bachelor's in graphic design. And then I had gotten through that, and then it's kind of funny that it took me 4 years to realize, but then I was like, this isn't really what I want to do. I like graphic design and I like the practice of graphic design, but 2D is kind of, I like the 2D space, but I also still felt kind of confined. So I felt like I wanted to explore. I kept hearing about Maya and Rhino at the time, and kind of a lot of stuff like that. And so I was like, yeah, I kind of want to explore that a little further. So I decided to go back to school, and I applied to go to Savannah College of Art and Design down in Savannah, Georgia. And there I went for 2 years for another animation degree, bachelor's. And then after spending, of course, a bunch of money to go to school, I realized that wasn't quite what I still wanted to do. So I spent a little more money and went a little bit more in debt, and I got my master's in interactive and game design. And that's where I really found my passion, I think, is that when I had finished my animation degree, I was like, well, it's really not the characters and the animation that I like. It's more the actual creating the spaces that those characters live in. And that kind of led me down the environment art path.
Right. Yeah. So, you got there eventually. it's a 30-second talk, but that was a multi-year journey, right? Something you started and, so a lot involved. Sure. But yeah, I think something that I've found even within 2D still, but which also exists, I think, has an easier point of access than 2D with 3D is world building and environment design and creating just landscapes for people, which I think is great. So, you've done all the education side of it. You've built your early career. So what was the first kind of stuff you were doing professionally? What were your first kind of, were you straight into AAA design, or did you start with small indie studios, or? No,
so it was definitely like, I found that I took the same path a lot of people I still think take today, which is like starting with a lot of freelance work and then like kind of working myself up so I could get more of a portfolio. So my first job, so when I first was applying, I probably applied over 100 places, legitimately, like 100. I'm not even exaggerating. Because I kind of worked my way down from like the most wanted to like, I guess I'll work here. We'll see. And so I got 2 offers at the time. One was for a commercial car part company in Germany, and I think it was in Berlin. And then the other one was for the Army Game Studio, and that was in Alabama in the United States. And so apologies for my dog.
It's all good.
So I decided, I was like, okay, well, I can either go in the modeling route, which is like the car part direction, which is cool, and they would need to go to Berlin and stuff like that. Right. But then I was like, well, it's not really what I want to do as a focus. Right. And so I was like, oh, hold on a second. Let me. Yeah, no worries. It's all good. So I had the decision between going with making 3D for cars or working at the Army Game Studio and working on propaganda games. And so I'm sort of a pacifist, so it was kind of a weird decision because I was like, I don't really want to work for the Army, but I also really want to make video games and not necessarily make like car parts. So I made the decision to be like, okay, I think a lot of people advised me at the time. They're like, your first job is never going to be the job that you're like, this was my dream job. It's going to be a job that's like a stepping stone onto the path of greater jobs. Yeah. Now I'll say that when I went, so I ended up picking Army Game Studio, and I would say it was a great first experience because I learned a ton at the time. I was working with really, really nice people. Like everyone there was really enjoyable. And the project was actually working in Unreal. So it was enjoyable to like get my foot in the door, kind of get that first step in there and just to kind of like practice working in a studio and things like that. And it was at a low risk because we're just working on like propaganda games and things like that. So that was my first gig. And then from there, I think for the next 9 months, I knew that wasn't my long-term goal. So for the next 9 months, I literally just sat every night after work and just worked on my portfolio to like try to get my skill even higher. So after about 9 months, I applied for a studio gig in San Francisco. And that's when I got the job at Kixeye Entertainment, and they're in downtown San Francisco. And that was the first time I'd even gone to the West Coast in the United States. So I was like super excited. I went for the interview, and they called me like a week later. And then I just like basically sold everything I had. I had $25 left in my name. And I was like, guess I'll figure it out when I get there. And then, man, I was just really glad I made that decision. And it's just like, I feel like each step progressively after that was just like another step in just trying to do what I think made me happy. Like, I got like further in my career. I had another offer to like either go work on Gears of War in Vancouver, which was like a long time game that I'd loved forever since Gears 1 and 2, or work at a studio in San Francisco that was like a startup, and the startup was going to pay like 4 times more. But I was like, it's all about, I kept reminding myself, it's all about what you enjoy doing. And as long as you stick to that kind of principle, you'll find that each step you make is a good one. Because like I ended up going with Gears, and man, I was just way happier. Like in the long run, I was just way more pleased. Yeah, there you go.
You guys can't see right now, but I'm holding up my Gears of War 3 limited edition because I'm also a very long time supporter of that shit. So
yeah, man, it was just such a joy to work on that game, and I would honestly look back in my career, and that was probably my favorite game I've ever got to work on. So I was really happy that I made that decision.
Yeah, I mean the architectural design and the environment design of those games has always been just groundbreaking. I mean, say what you want about the story or the direction that the games take, but just aesthetically, they've always been beautiful games to just walk through and take in. And it's a weird thing when you're a gamer and you start working on games and you start walking through worlds, and then you just stop every 2 minutes and being like, oh wow, look at that. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, and
crazy.
I mean, they have such a neat art style in that game that makes it fun as an artist to play with, because there's like defined rules, but there's also like a suspension of disbelief as to how ridiculous you can get with it. So it makes it fun as an artist to like know like, oh, Victorian plus like kind of steampunk plus like Gears and like all this stuff. But like you could also get wild with it, which is really fun. So I just really enjoyed the art style on that one for sure. Yeah.
And that was with, that was a coalition, right? That was
the coalition in Vancouver. Yeah. That was
after they split from Epic, right? They were kind of like a separate entity.
Yeah, right. Correct. Yeah. So that was like when they first started working on Gears 4. I joined on right after they showed the trailer. I think it was at E3 that year. It was like the outdoor, like kind of darker one. And they were like walking around with JD.
Right.
And so I joined on right after that, and I worked on 4, and then I worked on I'd say the first 6 months of 5 before I departed there.
Right. And then did you go? I mean, me not knowing, but did you go straight from Coalition to running Decagon? Was that like a straight transition?
No. So I worked. So I at the end of my career at the Coalition on Gears 5, I actually was working as an independent contractor on Gears 4, and then in Gears 5, I basically prepositioned to Microsoft. I was like, "Hey, I want to keep working with you guys, but I actually want to be hired as a studio." And they were like, "Okay, like." Sure. Wow. Why is that? And I was like, because I'd like to like have maybe potentially other people under my studio that would also work with you guys. And they're like, oh, okay. Like that seems of interest to like have a group of artists that you're like looking over or whatnot. And so that kind of branched out into them hiring me as an individual as Decagon at first. And that was kind of like the first stepping stone into like furthering that kind of relationship with them, and also like, getting additional clients after the fact. And so that that was kind of like with the first 6 months. And then after that, I was contacted by a studio down in Seattle, Midwinter Entertainment. And that was for a game called Scavengers. And I worked on that game for, I think, almost two and a half years, I would say. But that was also contracted through Decagon. So like I was the primary lead that worked on that. But then I also had, I think, anywhere from like, depending on what part of the project we were on, anywhere from like, I'd say like 4 to like anywhere to I think upwards to like 15 or maybe even 20 people at some point working on that project with me. And that was all through Decagon, working with them on their environments overall.
So, I mean, that would have been quite a jump as well, because did you have experience previously before going into Decagon or being hired as a studio? Did you have experience like leading a team, like, you know, heading up studios or like, you know, just like organizing work? And because I mean, you're also like, you know, as well as an artist and an art director role, you're also kind of like a producer in a sense as well, where you're organizing daily tasks and making sure people are checking in. And I mean, is that something that you just dived head first into, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think I got a lot of like micro exposure to it throughout my career. Like a lot of people were like, "Oh, why didn't you just do Decagon right away?" It's like, no, you got to there's a lot of things to learn before you even get to that point of like understanding how to like approach it. And so like,
of course,
I'd say like at Microsoft, we did a lot of like interaction and working with like outsourced development teams or like co-development teams. And so I think that helped kind of build my understanding of like how that relationship works and like, you know, estimates and like knowing like how much things cost and things like that to get made. And then continuing from there, working with Midwinter allowed me a bit more of a direct interaction where I'm also working on the team while kind of a hybrid. Like I was kind of a hybrid role because I was still part of the Midwinter Entertainment team, but I was also like leading Decagon. So it allowed me that kind of point where I was like kind of like in between for a while, enough to learn the ropes for both. And then I could kind of like make the stepping off point after I'd departed Midwinter Entertainment to be like, okay, I fully get the process. I know how it works. And that's when we started, I would say, really heavily contracting with like multiple studios. And so at that point, I would say Decagon was only contracting with around 2 to 3 clients. And then we had gotten to a point after we had left Midwinter that we were contracting with like 6 to 7 sometimes.
Wow. And then like now I take it like that's just exponentially just jumped as well. Like that's, it just went on and on and on. So, I mean, like, and then the teams, are you kind of dealing with the same kind of team sizes right now? Or again, has that jumped up? Has that grown?
It kind of all depends on the project. Like we'll have sometimes a project that will get contracted for that only requires a few artists because they're only looking for a certain, you know, like a small scene or like a few assets. Right. Yeah. And then we'll also have clients that are like, no, I need like 40 people. And it's like, okay, I mean, we'll have to look a little bit, but like you'll get to that point. So like it does take a little bit of work to get to that point and like to find and work with. The biggest thing for me is like working with like talented and trustworthy artists, but also like international artists. Like I love that essentially Decagon is like completely international and completely remote. Like there's no you know, place in which we all congregate. And so besides our like Discord community. So I find that that's my favorite part about it is it's like everyone's international. There's like varying degrees of like talent, skill set that we have throughout the studio. And then like, just like people that have been there for like, I have people that are there from day one still working with us and people that are coming on still to like just yesterday kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, which is great. I mean, it's always great when you get to just give people opportunities like that all the time. And I mean, it's interesting. I think with Decagon, a lot of the guys I've seen who work with you are people who also hold down like full-time jobs and will work with you on the side in project sense as well, which is crazy because it's a good way of just diversifying your income also, but then just getting loads of experience on different projects because people probably work within one project will also get an opportunity to dive in and do something. I mean, when I was at Axis way back when I did my internship, I know a lot of the guys spoke about how it was great. They could work there for like 6 months to a year and work on like 7 different projects with different people, like this thing for Blizzard, this thing for Magic the Gathering, this thing for Riot Games, like, you know, and then that would just fill the resume up and down. So, I mean, what is, you think, been the biggest change from where you kind of started to where you are now? Do you still have the same driving function business-wise, or do you feel like or even during the pandemic, it's changed? I mean, that's kind of a loaded question, but I'm trying to maybe understand what your focus is in now versus then.
Yeah, I would say like it's interesting. Like I talked to a good friend of mine about this the other day, that it's like as you kind of age into your career, you kind of go typically one of 2 paths, I feel like, as an artist. And I would say neither is a wrong path. But you kind of start out your career with just wanting to learn. Like you want to learn as much art content as you can, like the ability, your skills. You want to understand like how to do anything, you know.
Yep.
And as you kind of grow, you either go one of two paths, and one of the paths is basically like at first you want to enhance yourself, and then you get to a junction where you want to further enhance yourself to the point of like, being like an absolute like god of art, or you want to enhance others so that they can reach their potential. Right. And so I feel like what I like about the junction I'm at right now is I get a little bit of both of those, because I can continue to still develop my art, but I also really love the opportunity to work with artists as either, like you were saying, like as like, weekend and midnight warriors that are working with us like in their off time, or people that are using Decagon as like a stepping stone to further their career to get into like larger studios. So like seeing those successes is just like honestly like one of my favorite parts of the day. Like I love seeing like artists work with us, become successful, and then like move on to what their dream job was, or what studio they wanted to work at, or whatever. But then also getting to have so many projects that we work on. I really enjoy working with like artists as an artist myself, working with those artists on like projects that we're all collectively working on, and like getting to work on a bunch of like diverse content where it's like on Gears was great, but you work on Gears for like 3 or 4 years and you're kind of like, I've done a lot of Gears stuff. You're like, it's fun, but it's like, okay, like let's do something new. And so with Decagon, you get that opportunity like probably every couple of months, because a new project will roll around and it's completely different than the last kind of thing.
I mean, it's just kind of atypical of an outsourced studio, right? Because you're a gun for hire, so you just go where the projects are the most interesting and the ones you want to tackle. But yeah, I think I definitely have a couple of friends, even at 343 shout out row, for guys who have worked on like sci-fi stuff for a long time, and then in their spare time they're trying to do more organic stuff because it itches that thing that they want to do, to be different, to change up what they're doing. And yeah, I think it's a hard industry to even describe to people I know externally to the industry, because they're kind of like, you feel like when you have a job, you do the same thing for 40 years almost. It used to be the whole structure of you would have one job, you'd have that till you're retired, and then that would be you. But within this industry, you are a 3D artist per se, but then, like you said, you can change to art director, mentor, team lead, principal artist. There's so many directions you can span out, and I think that's why so many people, especially creative people, love it, because you're never bogged down to just one thing or just one project. And I think with Decagon, you've hit the nail on your head. It's like you could be there a year and work on 6 or 7 different things. So yeah, I mean, also impressive that you not only run Decagon day to day, do those things, work on those projects, but if you look through your portfolio as well, you've pumped out a couple of great assets and scenes and stuff over the time that you've had with Decagon. And of course, you've got a young family. Congratulations on that, by the way. And, you've just moved house as well. So are you finding like the balance is getting more and more difficult as you're moving on in your career, or do you still feel like you've got a good handle on it?
Yeah, I would definitely say it definitely comes to a point where you kind of have to determine what's important to you. And I think there comes a point in any person's career where there's going to be either like fame, glory, and money in front of you, or like mental stability to the left, So you kind of have to like make that decision as you kind of go through those issues. And I would say like definitely like there's been junctions in Decagon where I've had to ramp down a bit just for my own personal health to maintain my own sanity, because like there'd be a project come up that's like, oh man, this reboot of this game that's like, that I can't wait to come out. And it's like, I'd love to work on that, but also it's like, I literally just can't take on another project right now.
I'm so tired.
Yeah, exactly. So you're just like, all right, I'm going to have to pass, unfortunately. But it's just like, you kind of have to make those decisions. And it's like when you're presented with those opportunities, it's great. But I think the important thing that you learn as you go on in your career is that like, there will always be another opportunity. Don't feel like if you're shooting down this opportunity, that's it. Like you'll never get to work in this town again kind of thing. Like, people, when you're young, you're always afraid of that. You're always like, oh, if I turn this down, like no one's going to want to work with me, or like, I'm not going to get this thing I want. And it's like a common fear, and like everyone has it, but I will promise you that there will always be something else around the corner. As long as your portfolio is good and you're updating that content, there's always going to be something else that comes up. So I think like just maintaining that understanding and like realizing like, is this a good time to take this extra project on, or do I need this extra money right now, or should I take a little family time, or should I do something like that for sure?
Yeah. Because I mean, games and movies to an extent will always, like, entertainment's always going to be around. I mean, the money they make now, it's never going to end. It's only going to get exponentially bigger. And like you said, if you're especially like you talked about with like portfolio and timing, and you have a good body of work, but as long as you're also just a decent human being and
definitely
good to work with. I mean, I know I've even seen guys walk into studios and jobs that, you know, their stuff wasn't spectacular, it wasn't, you know, incredible, but they were just good. They were just decent people, and they would go to events and talk, and the guys would be like, oh, this is like a really nice dude, like he's fun to be around. And, you know, and I think that's also one of the biggest things you'll probably look for in Decagon as well, is just decent human beings that you can have a conversation with, and can take feedback and can be level-headed. And that's something I'm even right now, because I'm not teaching people, but I'm helping some smaller students, like guys who are, you know, like I'm talking guys that are, you know, they're just leaving university, like they're just getting started, and I'm trying to help them out. And yeah, that's the biggest thing I try to convey to them, is that your portfolio can be stellar, but if you're not a stellar person, then, you know, there's got to be a balance there where you're also just a great human being. Yeah.
Oh, hands down. Like I would say that's like, honestly, to me, especially as I've gotten older, like the people you work with make or break your day. And it's like, even if you're working next to like a superstar, if they're an asshole, it doesn't matter. It's like they're an asshole. Like that's the end of it. Like hands down, like we've had people in Decagon that have come through that like have had great work, but they just were so challenging to work with, or they just were so disagreeable, or they just argumentative, or like threw blame to other people so regularly that it just like, at the point of the day, I don't care. Like I'd rather work with someone that was nice, that had lesser quality work, even if they had a higher rate, like, because like at the end of the day, like I like working with that person, and it makes all of our lives easier, and therefore like a much more enjoyable experience.
Yeah, someone always told me that you can teach the tools easy enough when people get in studios, but you can't teach people to be kind. Like it's just a life skill that is unteachable. You're either a good person usually, or you're not. And you know, people can sometimes be rough around the edges, but if their heart's in the right place, you can see past that. But like you say, people are just flat out dicks, then you just can't have that in a studio environment, because games are so much a team collaborative effort, right? They're just so much of other people around you. You can't function as an island, essentially. So, So, I mean, when it comes to Decagon especially, what's the kind of things that, apart from also being a great person, are things that you look for within teams or within structure and prop artists? Because I'm assuming it's just specifically prop environment artists you're looking for, or do you do 2D outsourcing as well? That's something also you're doing, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all depends on like the project's needs. Like sometimes it will come up that we'll need like for instance, without saying project names or anything like that, like we've had need for like randomly like cloth gen people recently, or like UI people, like that happens like here and there. It's not as common. Same thing with like guns, like things like that. It just all depends on the project needs itself. But yeah, I would say the biggest things I look for is like, when I'm looking at portfolios, is like, one is a big one is consistency. Like if I look at the first three assets and like all of them have like different style normal bakes or like errors, and then like texture seams, and then the other ones don't, they look like perfect. Like it's just like kind of a weird consistency between the assets. That's always something that kind of throws up a red flag for me. So I'm always aware of that. And then like, I think more recently in years, I'm always looking for like color corrected PBR values, because a lot of people, I would say like juniors especially, will come into the industry and they'll be like, oh cool, like I'm going to make this metal and I'm going to make it super black because it looks dark in this picture. And it's like, they're not actually like looking at any chart or understanding like the real true value of anything. So I think that's a big one I always check for. And then I would just say like generally like creative approach. Like when we so Decagon gives out art tests, we give paid art tests, and we make sure that, you know, we pay the person for their time just as if they were working with us, just to get a feel of like how it is to work with them, the skill they give, stuff like that.
That's me. It's like, I'm applauding Clinton for that. So pay for your art test, for God's sake, please.
Right, exactly. If I'm going to occupy your time, at least I can do is pay you. So like, that, I totally agree. And also we give short art tests. It's just an asset, so it's nothing like that's going to take like multiple weeks of your time. I think that's crazy when people give out these like week-long art tests. So with that, it's like essentially when we get those, we're looking to make sure that the artist has enough creativity to derive information from an image and an idea. So like if I show you a picture of a Western shelf and I say, I want this to look old from an old Western film, and you make up the rest. If the artist can't, without asking like maybe a question or two, if they can't get that idea across without having to like be handheld, I think that's always a big red flag as well too. It's like, because when you're working with a client, multiple times the client's going to give you notes like, here's 4 things I want in this asset. Here's a quick reference image or concept image that was quickly sketched, and it's like you figure out the rest. And it's like no client nor any team lead is going to have time to like go over every aspect that you might have of that. So there's going to need to be some kind of creative approach to anything that you're creating as an artist. And so that makes you more hireable overall, is that you can look at something, derive your own ideas, understand context clues, and just like make the content without having to have an extreme amount of like instructional provided, information provided to you.
Yeah.
I think those are probably the major ones I look for. We do like full environment stuff. So I think people that have a decent understanding of like importing in Unreal and like building a scene is really helpful, because it shows that they understand what context is about like how the asset will be used. Because sometimes people will get like so hyper detailed that they'll be like, oh, let me make this like jar. And then they'll be like, okay, I made this jar 50,000 polys. And it's like, you made it what? And it's like, you realize this jar is like in a third person game on a shelf in a corner in a dark room. Like, you don't have to go to that extent, man. It's not that heavy. So it's like just realizing like its proper use and like context overall.
Yeah. I think it's one of these things that you can learn to model in Maya, right? Or Max or Blender, whatever the hell you're using. And then of course, when it gets to a point where you're then putting stuff into the engine, that's where people fall down, because they don't understand how things function within the world space, right? Because like, I've made this prop in Maya, and this is the best jar ever. Like, it's got so many verts and it looks super smooth and everything. But you fire that in the Unreal Engine with 50,000, and then the main character's sitting there like, what? I'm not important to you? What am I joke to you? Like, it's like you have to put everything in context. And I think it's a double-sided coin, right? I mean, I've had this conversation many times with people where I talk about the idea that the industry is almost too difficult to get into and is too hard on juniors and stuff like that. But like, I think there's a give and take, because you don't have to be good at everything when you're a junior, right? You don't have to be able to like work Unreal great, work Substance great, work Maya great. As long as you have a base understanding of everything in a scale of a pipeline, like, I can import stuff into Unreal, I can kind of texture stuff in Substance, and I understand how layers work, and I can also build verts and stuff in Maya with like, high to low bakes. And if you have that kind of base foundation, then people will kind of overlook certain things. Like, okay, he's not amazing in Unreal, but we can teach that to him. We can kind of walk him through bits and pieces, or show him this thing that we teach him. So, I think it's definitely a trade-off where you're trying to hire people also and give people opportunities, versus like not shooting yourself in the foot for future client work. It's a very hard balance to strike, because you were there once, right? You were a junior, you were just starting out. You know what it's like when you're trying to get your first job. I mean, I've literally just crossed the threshold of getting my first gig in the industry and getting paid work, and I'm now full-time. But like, for many years I was freelancing or doing stuff for free and try to build up my portfolio. Do you still take on like as many junior roles, or do you feel like the work you're taking on now, like there needs to be like the bar has raised, there's like almost a higher level now?
I think it's weird, right? Because it's like, I think when I first started, there was like maybe 2 websites that you could like get the information if you couldn't get it from like a professor. You would like be like, right, okay, I guess I'll go look at these 1 of 2 websites and hope that maybe one of them has this information that I'm looking for, or how to make the format properly. We'll see. Yeah. And so I think because the threshold of the amount of content that is available for learners to get almost for free entirely, like there's so much free content at this point that you can go to, that I think that unless someone is really digging into those, they're going to kind of do themselves an injustice, because I think those things alone raise your skill level to a certain degree. Like when it's funny to me, like sometimes you'll have a person that's trying to get an Unreal job, and I'll be like, oh, well, have you like cracked any, like open any of the free Unreal content packages and like seen how they've done something? They're like, no. And I'm like, why? Like, that's like free content. You literally can like learn how they're doing it for free. And so like whenever you have the opportunity to like invest a little time into those, I think it truly helps to bring your skill level up without even knowing it. And so I think that kind of brings it to a certain threshold. But then beyond that, I agree. Like, I think there's more of a, like, I think the film industry has already hit this point where there's so many specialists. Like there's compositors, there's lighters, there's like sublighters, there's like, tweeners, there's like all these like kind of special skills, and those people are hired for those skills. And then later in their career, they may branch into something else, which is totally normal. Right. I think the same thing is starting to evolve for game artists, where it's like you come in as a prop artist, or you come in as a texture artist or a materials artist, and then you get more into learning material, like, creating materials in Unreal, or like scripting, or like, Houdini or something. And then you go into that kind of focus. It's like,
Right.
I don't think anyone's expecting you to know everything right up front.
Of course.
But I think as a person entering the industry, look to what specialties are evolving. And those are the places that you should try to think like, do these interest me? And should I invest a little time into learning those up front? Because that will make you even more hireable, because you're already ahead of the curve of someone coming in, then learning that. And so like investing directly into that kind of specialty, while also, like you said, knowing a little bit of the other kind of basic stuff, will help you to be more hireable. Like I would say, like right now, like graphics engineers, like technical artists, Houdini people, those folks are like, man, everyone's looking for those folks right now. So like the people that know that are getting hired very quickly, even if they're at a junior level. So continue to examine those kind of trends that are evolving, you'll have a easier and better opportunity to find job right away, comparatively to like having to work your way through the specialties to get to the one that you want.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but yeah, I think what you're saying is accurate, is that because the industry is now evolving and has, come out of the 90s basement era, right, of people building games in spare time, you're now building an industry around things. And when industries explode, specialists are like the people to go to, like generalists can exist, and there's nothing wrong. I know plenty of people who are generalists and
definitely
works in studios, but then at the same time, yeah, like the guys who will move the quickest through the industry or get more opportunities, more rapidly, are the people who can focus on one thing and do one thing really well. And it's hard, I know personally, because as a thing as well, where I've loved all creative aspects of the industry. Like I love a bit of VFX, I love a bit of 2D, I love to draw. Still, it's just a hobby for me. And 3D obviously now is what I do as a career. But yeah, it's hard to sometimes, I think, because we just talked about it, right? Working on projects and multiple disciplines, multiple projects. You want to try and, as a creative, not stagnate or do one thing for too long, because you want to keep your mind fresh and keep your experiences different. So I sympathize with people who are starting the industry, because
definitely
you want to learn and do so many different things. But I think if you want to make a career out of it, then you need to find a niche and a valley to focus down to hone those skills. Because that's going to be more essential and more valuable for people like you who are running studios, right?
Definitely, yeah. And I think, and just because you start learning one skill doesn't mean you can't switch mid-career. I know so many people that have switched mid-career as to what they're focused on. I've even known people that have started as environment artists, then gone to character, then gone to vehicles, or gone, done whatever. And so it definitely happens. There's no like restriction as to what you can do. But I think really identifying those trends will help long term. Like I think like one person I would definitely think in this scenario is like Andrew Maximoff. So like when I worked with Andrew Maximoff at Kixeye, he taught me a lot about PBR, because it was a very emerging trend for a lot of game artists at the time. Like the Unreal 4 beta had just come out, and like people were just starting understanding it. And because he educated me and like the rest of the team on it, it made it so it was on my radar as things that I should be aware of. And then when I applied at Bethesda soon after, they were looking for someone that actually knew how to do PBR to educate their team. So then that made me more hireable to go on to that next group. So all those things will help you to get to your next stage, even if it's something that you're not like, I'm super excited about PBR values. Like that's not really like my like cup of tea. It's like wake up every morning and be like, yes, I love PBR. But it's like those kind of skill sets or bits of knowledge help you to achieve those next goals in your life for sure.
Yeah, which I think is, if you're involved in your career, you're always looking at the next thing, right? Because it's like a thing I've discovered very recently, and I think me and May, we just had another guest on who we talked about a similar aspect, but getting your first job, because I'd worked for so many years to get to that point, and you're struggling, then you get your job, and you kind of sit down on day one and you're like, cool. Yeah. When have I got anything left to live for? What's left to do? And you're trying to think about the next signpost or the next milestone or where do I go from here? And it's overwhelming, because like you say, there's so many, even within environment art, right? I've known people who are surfacing artists who deal just in textures, people who do lighting, who do Unreal work, who do node-based stuff with blueprints, like technical artists, right? There's so many aspects within even just that discipline. And if we're talking about 2D, Jesus Christ, like there's just so many routes to go down that as well. So definitely. What do you think is, let's talk environment, to just specify down to one thing and not make the question too overloaded. But you talked about tech artists right now and how that's a need as well. Do you feel like that's going to be the thing that that needs to be focused on, or do you think there's maybe one or two other things that are in the wins that people haven't quite caught on to yet? Like even like with surfacing, right, or with texture work, or the reason that Designer now is like so explosive that you can basically model in it. You know what I mean? Like, do you feel like there's avenues that are, you know, I think was it Forbes that said like 80% of the jobs that are going to be needed in the next 20 years haven't even been invented yet, right? So do you think there's
definitely
something that's coming up that you've seen early on that you might want to dive into, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really all just depends on like, it really depends on the studio's needs, right? Because like every studio is based on their size, it's going to need something different. So like when I say tech artists, that's more of just like understanding the hybrid between understanding a bit of code, understanding a bit of blueprint, understanding a bit of art. Because like there's this need that's occurring between like a lot of studios where they'll have a really strong tech team that understands the practice and how to like make things work. And then there'll be a bunch of artists that are kind of like junior or mid-level that don't really have a lot of experience with any kind of programming or coding. And so there needs to be this kind of hybrid between the two where it's like, okay, I've made a fence and I need to populate it in like an open world of like 5,000 fences. And the tech team's like, well, we don't have time to like make you a tool. And if they make it a tool, it's really rickety and not very artist friendly. And so like having this person in between that like understands both the needs is really, I feel like really, really vital right now, because you not only have to have a good eye for art, but you also have to understand like, okay, how is this going to be applicable and also like performant? So like realizing all that is going to be really big. And then the other big thing I think is coming forward is like just a lot of like people that are really interested in tools in general. Like you got to think like, okay, we're coming to the age of nanite where everyone's going to be making like 50 to 100,000 polygon assets. And like, it's going to be really heavy and hard to like manage and work with those. I've already had a lot of people complain at like Decagon about like, man, making the UVs on this like 200,000 polygon asset is like really painful. And so like, if you get to a state where you're interested in working in tools and like tools for artists, like I feel like that's going to be definitely a huge emerging trend, because you're going to find that we need to do things faster to keep up with the same production that we have for years, but we also have to make things better and look more higher quality. And so like having tools is what's going to enable us all to be able to do that. And so like those kind of hybrid between art and tech, I think careers are really what's going to be continuing to emerge. And I think into its own kind of field where you'll have like just our tech art teams on like larger studios, like much bigger than they are now.
Yeah, because we just interviewed Marina, who works at Splash Damage, and she's tech art there, and she was like, yeah, our team is only like 4 people at the moment, and it's not a huge team, but yeah, she talks about like trading that fine line between environment art and coding. Like there's just such a parallel, which was crazy to me as well when I interviewed her, and we had the whole conversation last week about, the episode just went live, and people were really astounded, like I was, to find that Marina didn't know or wasn't good at math naturally in high school and leading up. Like she self-taught all of that aspect of her career, and then with her love for art combined the two, right? And then she's found this niche in the industry for herself, because Splash especially, we're just so desperate for that void to be filled, because it is one of the hardest things. Even TDs and technical designers and technical directors in some projects, the technical people are the hardest to find right now, because there's a plethora of artists, right? There's you could throw a rock and hit like 20 environment artists, people who also understand blueprints, can code, can work with shaders, can work in node-based systems and designer. Like those people are the gold dust, right? That's the people that are hard to find. And I take it that's the same for you, right? Like within projects, if that's came up, that's been, there's maybe like 1 or 2 people, right, who can do that well, as opposed to
definitely
50.
Yeah, we'll have artists that come in and out of Decagon that work on projects, and it will be based on their skill sets, right? They'll be really good at ZBrush or really good at texturing, and that's great. I cherish those artists overall, but I would say like we revisit no artist more than people that work in tech, because I'm like, I need this situation solved, and I immediately go to them every time for almost every project, and I'm like, you're one of 3 people I know that might know how to do this. Do you have any idea how we could like solve this problem like that we're having with this? And so like those just people are just infinitely hireable. Like they're just like, you're always going to have some kind of work for that. And to your point, like I definitely failed math many times in school, and I still like work in like material shaders, and I love material shaders, but like I would say you don't need to know math for any of that stuff. It's just a matter of like you as a visual learner, you can learn how math is applied through visual context. And I think that's really what's important to understand. Like, don't feel like, oh, I can't get into that because I'm an artist. Like, there's tons of things that you can learn that are math based that don't really need math application to understand it. Like, you can visually understand how the math is occurring.
Yeah. I think that the math side of it and other program elements come in it when you start to build those tools, right? When you want to physically build something that doesn't exist yet, then of course you need to go into a code level because there's nothing there at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the shaders that already exist, especially with Unreal and other programs, they have been built so that you can use them as artists. It's not like a barrier of entry where I can't use this shader or these shaders because I don't know Unity, I don't know Unreal. Like, those things already have a preset UI, so you can learn them. But you couldn't build them. If you want to start building stuff, use versus build is the direction that splits the math down the middle. So yeah, I mean, with Decagon now, especially because you've got such a long history in environment art, props, scenes, is there anything you feel like is something you want to tackle within your specific discipline, or maybe even within Decagon, that you haven't quite crossed yet? Like, I mean, this is talking way down the line. This is like blue sky stuff. But would you want to start building your own games? Would you want to start maybe prefabbing and building things for yourself as a studio?
I would say, okay, so unpopular opinion. Oftentimes when I was on games, I found that I just really didn't care about the design. Like, I was like, okay, I respect the designers. I respect that their job is incredibly important. Like, and I respect that I need to follow the rules so that the game plays in a way that makes it fun for the player. All things I understand.
Yep.
But I guess, like, unpopular opinion, and to like also why I enjoy being an outsourced studio, is that like I can just focus on art. Like, I can follow the design guides that were provided by the studio, but it's not to the point where I'm like collaborating with design and like coming up with ideas as to like how the player is going to interact. Like, a lot of people love that, and I think that's great. Like, everyone's going to have different enjoyments of what they like about the game development process. For me, it's more about like visual storytelling and the emotional response, almost at a traditional art style level, that the player or the person gets from viewing the environment. So like, in that context, I think like, no, I wouldn't really be as interested in developing a game necessarily unless it was in that kind of like, spectrum of like aiming towards like making it an art based kind of game. But yeah, I think for me, it's like that. I really like the avenue that we've kind of chosen, just because we do get to focus so more exclusively on like developing the art overall. And so like, for me personally, I think as I can kind of continue my like trek forward, I think really what the things I enjoy is like, hey, I love just opening Unreal and like seeing all the new tools each time there's a new development, and like getting to put those into practice and like see how that will enhance the art for sure. Right. And then the other thing is just like, I honestly just like, every time I get to build a new environment and a new kind of like world, it's almost like I'm almost like building a part of a film that I wish I could see. So like, I really enjoy continuing to do that based on my new interests per year that I get to make the asset or the scene.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a really controversial question, but I don't think you want to answer it because
that's okay. Go ahead, feel free.
So the trailer for the new Resident Evil film just dropped, and they visit the Albert Manor, right? Yeah, you guys have just done that. You guys have just built a version of that, or a take on that. Do you feel like with your projects you're doing, do you feel like I'm trying to think of how to phrase this? Do you feel like you could almost build some of those scenes or those games better within your structure of a studio versus like someone who's worked on those films? Do you think it's something where you have to almost be part of the game industry to really get when they transition those things? It's always something I've came across that I found when people try to transition game space, 3D and cinematic design and storytelling into film industry stuff, there's always a disconnect. Do you feel like it's the same?
I think there's definitely a disconnect to some degree, because like I saw a Twitter post the other day that I really liked. It was like close your eyes, imagine, I forget what year Fallout 3 came out, and imagine you're looking at the grocery store about to enter it, like in Fallout 3. And I was like, man, that was a really, really like intense, great moment of that game. Like, you're like walking into the grocery store for the first time, it's abandoned, and you're like, this is crazy. Like, what am I going to find in here? And I feel like what kind of gets lost in the Hollywood approach to making the game is that like, there's this hard kind of illusion or this feeling to capture that's like the feeling of personal exploration for how you're experiencing it directly as to relation to you. Because like games, like we're obviously controlling the way we're perceiving what we're seeing. And whereas film, it's a bit different. So I think like, I honestly don't know if there's a perfect solution to that, but I think Hollywood kind of loses that feel of like it being a bit more personal to your experience. And so a lot of times it's just like the generalized idea of what this game was showing. And it's not so much about like, that's not the point. It was more about like how spooky the manor was, or how like creepy that corner was, or like how you were like, you know, your hairs were standing on end as you were going around this space, like exploring that area. And it's like, to try to be able to recreate that, I think takes a little bit more investigation as to like what generated that feeling to try to portray that back into like a film. So like, I think some films do it well, but I would say like overall it is definitely more challenging to achieve that in a film than it is a game.
Yeah, I think with games now, they're almost dwarfing films in a sense, where the atmosphere they can build is so one-to-one from the original idea. I mean, like, just talking about Resident Evil for a second, when you talk about Resident Evil 2, because that was obviously just released by Capcom recently, and I think they've done such an incredible job of rebuilding that game.
Oh, definitely.
But then you find now, when I've looked at the new Resident Evil trailer for that film, The Welcome to Raccoon City, you can almost see one-to-one that they're just paralleling, making a parallel of the game. Like the atmosphere, the mood, the art direction, the colouring, the way the structures are built. I mean, like, and they obviously revisit the mansion as well. So, like, I think it's where games, in a sense, can do certain things well when it comes to storytelling versus movies, because it is an interactive medium. But I think it's always going to be, I think you're never going to have a total balance between movies and games, because you've only sometimes always got even like an hour. Like if you made a film even about Fallout, right, and you had an hour and a half to tell that whole story, like, how would you do that? Like, because there's such an expansive universe even within that, right? It's hard to condense it into a short, into just one thing. But then again, it's like you can, because it's not an interactive medium with film, you can't have that walking in somewhere and looking up. Because if I walk into a door and look right, and you walk into a door and look left, we're going to have a different experience versus someone who has to view it through a lens. So it's the thing I feel that's missing within 3D. In films is that interactive element, but then that's like you're changing the mediums, right? We can't make games and movies have a baby and have some kind of perfect thing come out the bottom. But I mean, like, is that something also you've also thought about or even interacted with as well? Do you do anything towards film design or 3D film design, or are you just exclusively games?
No, we've done some like virtual set production here and there, like just really smaller stuff. We just not really definitely our focus. Usually when it's a client that's just easy to work with, that we like working with, we'll do something with them like on that scenario. Yeah. We've worked with a few people on like broadcast design. So like whether it comes to like news or like sports, things like that. And then, again, that's just based on like having a good relationship with that client. But I would say most times we tend to always lean back into games being our primary focus. And it's like, because we're kind of like, we're kind of like you were saying, it's like a work for hire scenario. So it's like, if the artists aren't enjoying it, like it's not really a successful project. So I always typically try to find work that like we all are going to enjoy. Like everyone's going to, the project's going to be like, this is a fun project to work on. Like, look at how cool these assets are. Or look at how neat the scene is. Like if you don't have if there's no spark of imagination or interest, then it's going to be really hard for any artist to want to put their all into the project overall. Yeah,
I could imagine. I mean, even in a sense with that project, I mean, because I mean, as relatively recent, I mean, 10 months ago, you know, we posted it, but with the Albert Manor, that was a collective. Was that a collective, or were you just on your own in that one, or?
So I would say that one was about, if I had to measure, I'd say about 90% myself, and then around 10% other additional artists. So like the character in the scene, that was made by two artists. One worked on the cloth sim, and another worked on the texturing and baking, and the gun for that character. And then I had some support from Kurt Koopser. He helped me to work on a lot of the textures initially for the project when I was first starting out, to trying to figure it out. And then from there, I just kind of like, honestly, it was a multi-year project. So I just kind of would toy with it a little bit, think about how I wanted to do something, and then kind of like experiment with some new Unreal tool that came out. And I'd be like, okay, cool. Like, I see how this is being used. Let me use it in the scene somehow. And then that kind of just collectively added on for years, until the point where I was like, all right, I think this is a cool scene to like actually release. Yeah.
It's weird even when you get to those projects where you have something on your hard drive for like multiple years, right? Because the power even the energy to build that up and go back and revisit it sometimes can be really difficult, because...
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So, I mean, for that, why was that an initial thing you why did you approach it in the first instance, and what kind of made you finish it?
Sure. I think when you get like small glimpses through a project as to like what the potential could be, it re-energizes you as to like completing the whole scene. So like, it is extremely challenging. And this is one thing I teach a CGMA class. It goes on for like 10 weeks about environments, like modular environments. And I always tell students, like, pick something you're really happy or excited about, because 10 weeks may seem like a short time, but it's going to seem like a slog in like week 6 if you don't like this environment. Like, you're going to hate it. Like, I think just like finding things in environments, if you're working on your personal projects, like that you're passionate about, and like the mansion, I don't know, it had a lot of like horror things that I've always wanted to explore when it came to like how the space was laid out, or like just like storytelling vibes that I was able to achieve. And so like, it just, every time I would hit a note that I'm like, oh, I got this note that I was trying to hit or nail, and I'd be like, okay, cool. Let me see if I can't continue this momentum into the next space that I want it to fill out here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the hardest things as well, because people don't really realize, and I talk about revisiting, because we're almost talking about motivation versus discipline, where you can build something forever and ever, but like the project only really comes together, or that would have maybe just like hit the note of like, this is what I want in the last 10%, right? Which is the hardest bit to get to, because all up until that point is pre-production and building assets and texturing and like, so was there a point, I'm trying to think of the point, where do you feel something's done? Like, is there a point you were trying to get to in your head, or do you think generally that just happens with experience?
Well, I guess like two parts of that. One is when my wife says, "Okay, you've worked on this long enough." That's the first point where I start to question: is it done yet? I can't tell. And then the other point is where I would say like where I think when I feel like I'm getting an emotional response from looking at the piece, like when I can look back at the piece and say like, does anything feel out of place or missing here, or am I drawing on the emotional response that I wanted to get out of this? And I'd say that kind of lends me into like another kind of route, which is like basically like there's kind of two types of environment artists when they're making something on their own. It's like one artist is a person that like determines what they want to make up front and then basically works to that. And then the other person is me and like a bunch of other people I know. They kind of start with one thing and they definitely change that plan like 50 times throughout the process. And it's a much more organic kind of process, to the point where at the very end, really honestly, what you end up with is almost nothing what you kind of planned at the beginning, except for maybe a few like references and cues overall. And so like, I think that to me is like when I get to a point at the end of the process where I feel like I hit the kind of major notes that I was trying to aim for at the beginning and it feels complete, that's where I start to feel like I can wrap things up for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, at one point you've got to say things are done. I mean, I know they're never done, right? Nothing's ever finished. Yeah, but I mean, it's always one of these things. I think now with technology and saving states and files, that you could always, open Unreal 5 at one point and just start diving into new stuff and see how you can improve. But yeah, there's a point where you can overwork something also, and it's just too much, and then you have to start scaling it back and thinking, right, I'm just going daft now. Like, you start like moving every tiny wee verts from like Windows and stuff like that, and like every little broken bit of glass, you're like, right, okay, I need to stop messing with this stuff. It's done. Like, there's too much. So yeah, it's a difficult point to get to, but yeah, I think it's one you've got to almost come to, because yeah, you need your sanity. But then is that something that you find hard on client work as well as personal stuff? Like, you obviously art directing the whole projects, like, and you're obviously delivering on what the client wants, but is there a back and forth where you feel like you have to hold something off because it's not quite done, or do you just have deadlines that you can't just avoid? Yeah,
I mean, like when you work with a client, there's like deadlines. So I think there's always going to be a level of like unfinished that just happens. When you have a deadline in place, there's always going to be a level that you don't reach that you may want to. But like, I think the important thing about that's the difference between being a traditional or commercial artist. Like a traditional artist that you could work on a painting for 12 years and then finally put it in a gallery when you're done. That's your priority, man. You can choose whatever you want to do, however you want to do it. So it's like, that's a traditional art path. But when you're working as a commercial artist, the second biggest thing to being a good artist at that point is like knowing how to contain it within a time period. So like doing the same skill that you just did, but like knowing like, okay, I only have 8 days to do this in, or I only have 20 days to do this in, or I only have 6 hours to do this in. Like realizing like, even if you're not completely done with it, it has to be satisfactory by the time you reach that kind of in commitment. And that's really what's going to make you a continuously hireable commercial artist, because that's your role. It's like maintaining that kind of workflow within that given time.
Yeah.
And I think that's also where a lot of people end up burning out too, is because you get to this point where you're like, I've trying to produce so much high quality content in such a short amount of time that you don't take time to like recharge yourself in a traditional sense where you're just making art for the sake of making art. So I think finding that balance is really important for anyone in that role, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt like even there was a thing where I got my first paid gig, versus like my first full-time gig where, I think the first weekend I was working, I'd worked like a full week, my first kind of full week of work. And I got to the end of like the weekend and I was saying to myself, okay, I'll work on my personal scene, or I'll do this or do that. But I honestly must have just sat most of Saturday and done nothing. Because for the first time, I think in like 5 years, I felt this weight just fall off me that there's money coming in this month. I can pay my bills. Like, oh my God, I can actually rest and like sit here and enjoy it. Like I made a whole post that like, I wasn't, for the first time in years, I didn't take my breakfast up to my desk to eat. I just like sat downstairs and took 10 minutes just to chill, because it's hard. It's almost like an OCD thing with people I know who are successful, where you can't walk away from stuff. Like with your wife and with like your kid and stuff, like it just must be torture to think I've got to pull myself away from my work. I've got to go in. But like, do you feel like switching off for you is easier now, or do you still feel like you're trying to almost like unhook yourself from the desk?
No, I mean, I don't think it gets. I don't think it honestly gets any easier. I think you just have to force yourself sometimes to do certain things. Like, I mean, like obviously, like I want to be the best dad and like husband I can, but I also like it's still really important to me to be like enjoy my art, like what I do as art. Like, mm-hmm. I don't think to the day I die I would ever be like, I'm just going to quit making art. Like, I just don't think it's in me to stop. And so, I think like you kind of exactly what you said. You have to find and force yourself sometimes to recoup and relax, or you'll just go insane and you'll burn yourself out. And you'll find that the quality of your work and the care that you give will diminish quite significantly if you don't make those times for yourself, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we even I spoke about that with someone recently as well, and how the fact that I had money again and I had full-time employment and some kind of safety net, even for just now, it made me re-love art again. Because for so many years, the love just fell out of it for me. And I felt so many times like quitting and giving up and just didn't want to keep doing it, because every time I sat down on my computer, I just felt depressed and felt so just drained. But then when, funny enough, the money came along, and I left a really well-paid job as an engineer when I was 29 to come back and chase my dream, which I've now accomplished, thank God, over many years. But yeah, like being poor for so long and just living off savings, it really was difficult. And that first week of just thinking like, oh, there's a wage coming at the end of this month, thank God, it reinvigorated me to be like, I can do a personal scene now, and I feel like staying up and doing stuff at the weekend, because there's not as much pressure anymore to get work or find work. There's that kind of like, I have money coming in, I have work coming in. So yeah, I think it's mental health is something we don't talk about. And I watched a talk the other day with GDC where they talked about mental health and work and how to deal with burnout, and how they talked about how there's almost no veteran game designers or veteran artists in the industry, maybe even over the age of 45 to 50, because, I mean, there is some, but very rarely, because people get so burnt out and have been so burnt out for the past 20 years of making games that they just get to a point where they're like, I'm done. I just don't want to do it anymore. And I think it's like you said, you have to strike the fine balance, or, it's a marathon, right? Not a sprint. You've got to think about the end goal, the end game. When people talk about my struggle of like, oh my God, it took you 7 years since you left your job to find employment. Well, yeah, I wasn't expecting it to happen 6 months after I left. Like, for some people that's great, but I went through the whole education side and went to university. And when I left in 2012, ArtStation wasn't even a thing. I mean, so, it's taken me this long. And again, because I've maybe dabbled in different stuff, but yeah, I think mental health is something that I've been conscious of the whole way. And I'm glad I think I've took stock now and again and stopped and took breaks, because it took me longer. But I'm sane. I'm still here with a level head on me. And that's probably what you're thinking, right? Going into like, your later years, that you want to still have consistency, but you want to still also, like you said, be a good dad, be a good husband. So, yeah, I mean, is there anything you would kind of give advice for people in the industry right now getting into it that they think should pay attention to?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is like a few things. Like, well, first off is like crunch. Like crunch is rough. And I've done my share of crunch. But I honestly, at the end of the day, I don't believe in crunch. Like, I don't like crunch. Like, I think if I've committed myself, if I've personally said that I'm going to do something in a certain amount of time, and I have to crunch to do that, then sure, that's fine, because I've made that promise to myself and whoever was my employer. But
Right.
if it's mandated crunch for no real reason, then like stand up for yourself, like say something, like be an advocate for yourself and those that are around you that don't have the confidence to do so. Because
Right.
if game artists don't stand up for themselves about crunch, the same thing that's happened to film will happen to us. We will all be crunching 7 days a week, 12 days an hour, like 12 hours a day. That will happen to us if we're not careful. We have to like make sure that we're like advocates for each other. That's the biggest one. And then the other one is like, I think take time to reflect, like when you're doing something and you've done it for so long. And if you feel like you're so, like say you've worked on a project for like 12 months and you've been crunching for that time, and you get to the point where you're like, I don't know when this is going to end. Like stop and say to yourself, like when it ends, are you going to be happy when it ends anyway? Like, is there any enjoyment that you're still going to receive if it is or isn't ended? Like, does it matter? And if it doesn't, then really like rethink about like where you are. Like maybe you should be doing like a different type of role, or maybe you should be in a different studio, or maybe you should be doing all kind of different project. Like don't be afraid to reevaluate where you are. Just because you change, like you just said, like just because you change what you're doing doesn't mean that you're a failure at either the things that you were doing before or the things that you're going to do in the future. It's just that you're reevaluating what your current state is, what your current mindset is, and what you should be doing for yourself. And so I think taking those times is the healthiest thing you can do for yourself, to really be sure like you're content with the decisions that you've made up until now, and you're content to continue with that decision that you've made moving forward. Because it's like, if you're not, then change it. Like I'll hear a lot of artists that I've talked to in the past be like, oh, like I'm doing this, or like I'm doing this and I don't like it. And it's like, they work to change it. Like, are you like working to do anything to like change what situation you're in? And it's like, if the answer is no, then like, why not? Like, why aren't you like working to like better the state that you're in right now?
Yeah. I mean, I agree 100%. I think, I know people who have been in really uncomfortable situations, and their goal was to like, do the day job, but then when they come home at night, they're crunching to do stuff. But that's in an end result of moving studios, finding another employment, moving industries, changing job roles. So, I mean, there's always, and I think like he says that, there's a point you get to, I mean, it was always a thing I never understood early on, but there's a point you'll get to within your art where you're hireable, right? You don't have to be your level, like Clinton's level, to just get work, right? There's a level where you'll hit and people are like, you're good enough. I can hire you. I can trust you to make things. Here's money. So never be sitting at your desk thinking, I'm never going to find work. I'm never going to, if I leave, I'm never going to, you will. I mean, and I left one of the most secure jobs in the UK, working as an engineer, to go and be another thing, which is an artist. And people told me, I'd never do this, I'd never do that. I've done it all. I've run a podcast for 5 years. I've left my job and lived off savings. I've entered the industry that's potentially one of the most difficult industries to enter. Like, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And if you're already in a position where you're already working in a studio, you'll find another studio. It's not an impossible thing to do. And I think that's also probably why Decagon exists, right? Because for many years crunching, for many years working within studios, like, you just enjoy now maybe the freedom you have to pick and choose your projects, pick and choose your clients, pick when you're taking a break or a gap, or you're maybe leaving a bit time for work and time for family. So, which is, we both know is a luxury, is something that not everybody gets to do, but you've also worked very hard to get to where you are, like to have that luxury. So, yeah.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, I totally understand that, like, not everyone's economical, social status is going to provide them as easy of an opportunity to make that change for themselves. But I would just say, like, if there is a way that you can possibly change your scenario and you think that there is, then like go for it. Like you said, like crunching for yourself is a lot different than crunching for someone else. Like if you're working hard for yourself to achieve that next goal that is beyond the scenario you're in now, that is worth the time and effort to reach that goal, And so like setting those like standards for yourselves and realizing like, okay, if I make the changes now, then I'll see the long-term benefits overall. Yeah.
And I mean, I definitely think that's one of the things they talked about in that talk in GDC is that, if you're crunching, for yourself, that's one thing, but when you're doing it for a client, it's like, well, where is that payoff going to be? When you crunch for 9 to 10 months and then you finish that project, the guys at the top are reaping the benefits. The guys who own the company, the guys who are pitching it, you're just going to go back to being you. Like, what have you gained within that spell? And if it isn't something that's personally achievable, then why are you doing it? Like, why sacrifice that part of you? Because at the end of it, to get deep and philosophical, as I think all artists get in their life, is that, you're only here for a finite amount of time. And time is something you'll spend and never get back. So if you spend all that time in the pursuit of someone else's dream, you have to make sure it's worth it and that it's going to pay back to you dividends, because then it's just a waste. Then it's something that you're never going to get back. You're never going to be able to recoup. And it's a difficult balance to find, because, I heard somebody talk about how you can be picky with your first job as a junior and try to think if the studio's a right fit for you, but then also you're a junior, right? You want a job. You're desperate for that work. You want to get your foot in the door. So sometimes you just have to make sacrifices at the start, and it's just part of the industry. But then that exists, I've found, in every industry in the world, is that your first job is always going to be the most difficult, or the one you have to make the most sacrifice on. But then if you have a goal, if you have a plan, if you have an aspiration to move forward and get better, then you will get to a point where you get to pick a studio to work at, or you pick the projects you work on. So the initial stuff is hard, but there is a payoff in the end, right?
Definitely, yeah. And I think like back to what I was saying about like being an advocate for others, like we were all in that junior point at one point, right? And we all or maybe at a studio we didn't like to work at because of the culture, or we just didn't like something about it. Like whatever studio you're at now, make it so that juniors want to be at that studio and they enjoy their time there. Like, like I'm saying, like, it's like, why continue the trend? Like, make it so that people around you enjoy being with you and around you, enjoying the studio life that they're in right now. So it's like, try to find ways to like make it so the culture gets better across the industry instead of like worse,
Yeah. I mean, like, it's just that we could open this can of worms for all day and talk about this, about just studio culture and how a lot of the studios that exist now have existed for many years, for 90s, 2000s games and stuff like that, where it was a different time and place to make games, and the studios were different areas to work in. And it's it's creating a safe space for people to feel confident that they can almost fail to an extent, or do bad things, but then not get chastised for it, or not get like thrown out the door because they're making mistakes. Everybody's learning, everybody's wanting to be in there. And even now I'm talking to a couple of guys I know who are senior and art director status in some AAA studios, and they're talking about some of the hardest things they're finding is finding juniors that are confident to come in the door and help them, because there's so many seniors in the industry now, or so many people at the, like you said, the niche or the specialization, that finding generalist roles or people at the bottom rung is super hard, because they're either burnt out or so disillusioned with the industry they don't want to take any jobs. So it's a balance again you have to strike with studios, is that you want people coming in the door, but you don't want them petrified walking through the door, right? That's the hardest thing as well. Yeah.
Inspire confidence so that people will feel confident enough to do their job. Because like, honestly, everyone's nervous their first day, or like first time they've done something. It's like that. I still get imposter syndrome like every day. Like, it's such a common thing for everyone to be like, am I supposed to be doing what I'm doing right now? And am I doing it right? That's just a common thing. You'll never
sure
get out of
pay
that.
me? Yeah. I mean, like, I've had like people in this podcast where like yourself, or people who have had this whole catalog behind them, and they're like, you're sure you want to interview me, right? Like, you want to talk, you're 100%, like, you're not, I'm like, no, seriously, like, it's your one on. But it's a hard thing to get, because even now I put stuff out where people are like, oh, that's great, that looks amazing. And I'm like, really? Like, but then I was watching Chris Doe the other day on the Future podcast, and he was talking about detachment, right? Where like, once you make art and you put it out, you have to detach yourself from it, because it's no longer yours, it's the world. So he was like, a good way to look at your art is like, what if you didn't post that? What if it was like, if I posted something and you posted it, it was Clinton's work. How would I criticize that work? How would I look at it differently? It's the same like when you post anything. Like, if you imagine you weren't posting it, imagine it's something you found on Twitter, right? Now look at it with fresh eyes. How does it look different? And that's the thing I think people need to do in this industry to also avoid burnout, and also just the mental health strain, is like, try and detach yourself from your work and understand that your whole being isn't in this piece. I mean, you can give it love and care and attention when you're working it, but once it leaves your hands, try and just like push it away, separate yourself from it, and then try and view it objectively, because people get so personal, especially a lot of juniors I talk to are so personal about their work, that like, if they make something in Maya for 10 hours and post it, and you try to start critiquing it, they just fall to bits. And you try to understandably tell them that, I'm not saying that you are a bad artist, that you have done something wrong. Just on this particular piece, that is something I feel you could fix. And it's a hard disconnect. I totally get it, where like, even when I was interning at Access and I would do something either wrong, or would, misconstrue something they were saying, I would get this gut feeling like, oh my God, like, I feel so horrible. But they were like, it's fine. Like, it's okay. Just keep going, keep pushing. You're doing okay. And even at my first couple of weeks of my new job, like, everything I was posting, I was like, is this cool? Are you guys enjoying this? And like when people were like, oh my God, this looks amazing. Like you're doing such a good job. I was like, oh my God, I was like in tears. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. But that must be a worry for people who work with Decagon as well, especially because you guys have such a huge name now, right? Like people are worried when they come in almost to an extent.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we have like an onboarding like web page and like site that we kind of run where it's like it makes it very clear like all of us are learners. Like no one's like perfect. Like we're all going to make mistakes. Like every single person is going to make a mistake, including management, like on a regular basis. Like it happens. We're all human. So I think like just having that expectation up front makes it easier for people to be like, okay, like. Just do the best you can. And if you have questions, like ask them. Like no one's afraid of like to answer a question or ask a question. So I think that's kind of the studio culture that I try to like make sure that is consistent through Decagon, is that like no one feels like they're so out of the loop that they can't ask a question and be like belittled or anything of that nature. Like we make it very clear that it's like, if you have questions, I'd rather ask it than like just be like in the dark. So like try to find ways to like educate yourself or like ask others if you're unsure.
Yeah. I mean, like I know someone I've sat next to even at university who was like, I want to ask my lecturer how you open this file, but I think he's going to laugh at me if I do. And I'm like, dude, like,
that's what
you're at university, you're learning. Like, ask him. I'll tell you. Ask me. Like,
yeah, that's totally what you're there for. That's what you're paying those dollars to literally sit in that desk for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I think, the conversations went a different way than I thought it was going to towards the end, but I'm glad it did because I think there's not enough talk about mental health, being productive, the long-term goals for artists. Like there's a whole thing that people avoid where, I just told you I had Mary Sue on, and I think one of the greatest things we talked about was like how she at one point moved just because of her partner and she wanted to be closer and have that more family orientation from where she was from. Where I've speak to so many people over the last 5 years in this podcast who are like the biggest art directors and the biggest studios, and their constant drive was moving, finding new work, moving, getting better, finding new work. And I was almost like, is there a person in there? Is there a human element? Like you, like, sure. Do you eat? Do you sleep? Do you people like, talking even like people like, Vitali and guys who like, who will move hotkeys to a different key so their pinky can hit it quicker. So it saves them 30 minutes on one model versus 10. Like people at that extent are like what we call the unicorns in the industry, right? People who are super well done and have these incredible careers, but they're rare. They're like the exception to the rule. Whereas there are people I know, even people to think, I know guys in the industry who don't have art stations, are never online, don't even have a Facebook, but they go every day to a studio and do work and then come home and sit with their family. Like there can be that. There can be people in this industry that exist where, you don't have to run your own studio, you don't have to run a podcast, you don't have to be an art station all the time, posting constantly. You can have a life outside of your work, So, I mean, it's something we need to talk about more, and I think you'd be an advocate for it as well, is that it's not spoken about enough, but kids have this view of the industry that it's impossible to get in, it's impossible to stay in once you're in, it's impossible to find work, it's super hard, it's the most challenging thing you'll ever do. I still play video games, I still have time down outside of my work where I do things, like you can have a life working in this industry, because like any industry, it's a job, you have hours. And I think, like you said, you talked about earlier, where crunch has been so prevalent in the news that people think that's just part and parcel of the industry, right? That's just something they're going to have to deal with at one point. They're going to have to be in the studio 100 hours, 150 hours a week, or whatever it's going to be, something stupid. And we need to change that narrative. We need to make sure that going forward, if we want it to, like you say, not turn into the film industry and be sustainable for people to have work-life balances, we need to be vocal about that stuff. And I think even myself, like I've talked about like unionization, I think it's a great thing for the industry as well, and something like that would be great for just people coming in the door and going out, so that studios can't just close and people are left with nothing. So but a bigger can of worms than we can probably get into the day, Clinton. It's to a huge extent. I mean, if you want to just anything closing on that, just you want to kind of ride out and you say,
yeah. I mean, I think you essentially what you said. You make all really good points when it came to that, because it's like it's really just about like establishing what you like. Easiest said is like, when you die, what do you want to look back and be like, I did with my life? Like, do you want to be like, I just worked on video games? Or do you want to be like, I did this, I like was into skiing, I also made video games? Like, what are the things you want to cumulatively say that you did in your lifetime that makes you happy, that you lived your youthful years doing this, your older years doing this, and then you died? Like, it's like if you can't reflect back on those things even now and say, I enjoyed those years that I just spent, then you're in trouble. Like, make a change, because like you're only going to get older, and you're only going to have less time over time. So like, make those changes now before it's too late. And you're looking back and being like, man, I just crunched the last like 15 years of my life, and I don't have anything to show for it, nor did I care. Like, that's not good, you know? Like, so like finding ways to really reflect. I think self-reflection is the biggest thing. Just constantly self-reflect, like what it is that you want, and then what it is that you can change. It's the big two things for sure.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. Well, I think that's a good note to end it on. And yeah, that was an amazing discussion. Yeah, definitely went a couple of different avenues and routes, but I overall enjoyed just chatting with you, Clinton. It was a great honour to have you on the podcast, and thanks again for giving up your time and coming to talk to us. Yeah,
man, same thing. I had a great time for sure.
Yeah, definitely. If you guys have listened to this point, thank you. Check out Clinton's work. I'll leave links to Decagon and his personal pages down below. You guys can check them all out. And if you've got any questions, you can reach out. I'm sure he's a sociable guy. He can help you at any stage if you need anything. And check us out on different platforms. We're on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, loads of different services. And of course, we can live on YouTube. We have most of our episodes up there, and you can leave comments down below or any likes or dislikes. Just check it out. Other episodes we have are up on the website also. And if you have any other suggestions for guests, again, leave them down below, or you can join our Discord and chat away there. We have about 300 members now, so there's a good little community going in there. You can chat and share and add art. So thanks again for you guys for listening. Thanks for Clinton again for coming on, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks, guys. Bye.